I'm Major Emma Scott, 28, and I built my life in service, 2 tours overseas, lives saved, respect earned. For years, I was the sister who covered for Erica, protected her, and stood in her shadow. But at her wedding, when she looked me in the eye and called me unworthy of a husband, I made a choice that changed everything. Have you ever been humiliated by someone you sacrificed so much for? If so, share your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I dive in, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to reclaim your worth after being underestimated, hit like and subscribe. Because what happened next might surprise you. The comments started small, wrapped in laughter like gifts with poison inside. At family dinners, Erica would tilt her head and ask, "Why don't you ever bring anyone home, Emma?" Her voice carried that particular sweetness reserved for public humiliation. Her friends would giggle on cue, their eyes dancing between us like spectators at a tennis match. I'd learned to smile through it. Just haven't found the right person yet, I'd say, cutting my chicken into precise squares. The conversation would move on, but the sting would linger. Erica had perfected the art of the sideways insult, the kind that leaves you wondering if you're being too sensitive while knowing exactly what just happened. At Christmas last year, she introduced me to her boyfriend's friends as my sister, the career woman. The way she said it made it sound like a disease. She's so dedicated to work, she doesn't have time for a personal life. More laughter. I watched her perform, noting how she positioned herself as the normal one, the one who'd figured out the secret to being a complete woman. The pattern was always the same. She'd make her comment, her audience would respond, and I'd stand there holding my dignity together with sheer will. I told myself it was just sister stuff, the kind of teasing that comes with family territory. But something deeper was happening, something I didn't want to acknowledge. Erica had appointed herself the judge of my worth, and her verdict was always the same, lacking. In her eyes, I was the sister who couldn't quite figure out how to be a woman. The one who chose uniforms over dresses, discipline over romance, service over settling down. She saw my life as a series of wrong turns, a cautionary tale she could reference whenever she needed to feel better about her own choices. I started noticing how she'd light up when delivering these little cuts. The way her smile would sharpen just before she spoke. How she'd wait until we had an audience, preferably people who didn't know me well enough to defend me. She was building a narrative about who I was, and I was letting her write it. The worst part wasn't the comments themselves. It was watching our parents laugh along, seeing cousins nod in agreement, feeling the weight of collective judgment settling over me like dust. Erica wasn't just making jokes, she was establishing a family truth. Emma, the unmarried daughter. Emma, the one who couldn't manage what every other woman seemed to do effortlessly. I'd drive home from these gatherings with my hands gripped tight on the steering wheel, replaying her words. "Why don't you ever bring anyone home?" Because I was stationed overseas for 2 years. Because I was completing specialized training. Because my life had purpose and direction that didn't require validation through someone else's presence. But I never said any of that. I just smiled and took it. The irony was perfect. Erica saw my single status as failure, but she had no idea what I'd actually accomplished. She didn't know about the commendations, the leadership positions, the respect I'd earned from people who mattered. To her, none of that counted because I didn't have a man on my arm at family functions. Her friends would sometimes try to help, suggesting blind dates or apps, speaking about me in third person while I stood right there. "Emma just needs to put herself out there more," they'd say, as if my romantic life was a group project requiring their intervention. Erica would nod sympathetically, playing the concerned sister role while her eyes held something else entirely. I started declining invitations. Family barbecues, birthday parties, casual gatherings where Erica might be holding court. I told myself I was busy with work, which was true enough. But really, I was protecting myself from her performance, from watching her turn my life into entertainment for people who barely knew me. The distance seemed to make it worse. When I did show up, the comments came with extra bite. "Look who finally decided to join us," she'd say, or "I was telling everyone how you never have time for family anymore." She made my absence sound like arrogance rather than self-preservation, another character flaw to add to her list. I should have confronted her. Should have pulled her aside and asked why she found such pleasure in diminishing me. Should have demanded she explain what she thought she was accomplishing with her public commentary on my personal life. But I didn't. I kept swallowing it, telling myself it didn't matter, that her opinion didn't define me. But it did matter. Each comment was a small wound, and they were accumulating. Erica wasn't just making jokes, she was shaping how people saw me, how I saw myself. She was creating a version of me that was incomplete, pitiable, somehow less than. And I was helping her do it by staying silent. The engagement announcement came with a phone call. Erica's voice bubbled through the speaker, breathless with excitement about venues and dresses and guest lists. I offered congratulations, asked the appropriate questions, played the supportive sister role she expected. But even then, even in her moment of triumph, she couldn't resist. "You'll be my maid of honor, of course," she said. "Though we might have trouble finding you a date for the wedding." The laugh that followed was bright and sharp as glass. "Maybe you could bring someone from work? If there are any single guys in the military." I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, staring at it like it might transform into something else. This was supposed to be her happy news, her big announcement, and she still found room to take a shot at me. The pattern was so deeply ingrained she probably didn't even realize she was doing it anymore. "I'll be fine going alone," I said finally. "Congratulations again, Erica. I'm really happy for you." But as I hung up the phone, I felt something shift inside me. A seed of awareness that had been growing through months of small humiliations suddenly sprouted into clarity. Erica didn't see me as her equal. She never had. In her mind, I was the supporting character in her story, the cautionary tale that made her choices look better by comparison. And I was tired of playing that role. The reception hall buzzed with conversation and clinking glasses, 200 guests celebrating Erica's perfect day. I sat at the family table, watching her work the room in her elaborate dress, accepting congratulations and compliments like a queen holding court. She looked beautiful, radiant even, exactly like brides are supposed to look. I'd fulfilled my maid of honor duties without complaint. Helped with the dress fittings, organized the bridal shower, managed the rehearsal dinner logistics. Smiled for photos and made appropriate small talk about how lovely everything was. I'd even given a toast at the rehearsal dinner, carefully crafted words about sisterhood and love and new beginnings. But throughout the weekend, Erica had kept up her familiar routine. Little comments about my appearance, jokes about my perpetual single status, observations about how different we were. Her friends ate it up, this ongoing performance where I was the punchline. "Emma's so serious," she'd say, or "my sister doesn't really do the whole dating thing." Always delivered with that sweet smile, always followed by laughter. The final straw came during dinner. Erica stood up, champagne glass in hand, ostensibly to thank everyone for coming. She talked about love and family and new beginnings, hitting all the expected notes. But then her gaze found me across the table, and I saw something familiar flicker in her eyes. That look that meant she was about to perform. "You know," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "I've always believed that some women are just naturally suited for marriage. They understand what it takes to make a man happy, to build a real partnership." She paused, letting the words settle. "And then there are others who are just, well, unworthy of a husband." Her eyes stayed on me as she said it. The table fell silent, guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Erica's friends giggled, the sound sharp and ugly in the sudden quiet. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, felt the familiar sting of public humiliation washing over me. But this time was different. This time, she'd gone too far. I sat perfectly still, my champagne glass untouched, my face carefully neutral. Inside, I was calculating. 28 years of this. 28 years of being her favorite target, her go-to source of entertainment at my own expense. 28 years of swallowing her poison and calling it sisterly love. The groom, Michael, had been talking to someone at the next table when Erica began her speech. I watched him turn, saw his expression change as he caught the tail end of her words and the uncomfortable silence that followed. He looked from Erica to me, and something passed across his face that I couldn't quite read. Erica was still standing, still holding her glass, probably waiting for me to respond or react or give her the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. Her friends were watching with barely concealed glee, anticipating the next part of the show. The rest of the table looked like they wished they could disappear, caught between family loyalty and basic human decency. But before I could say anything, before I could even process how to respond, Michael stood up. He walked over to the microphone the DJ had been using, tapped it twice to make sure it was on. The entire reception hall turned to look at him, conversations fading as attention focused on the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being heard. "I'd like to take a moment to recognize someone very special who's here with us tonight." Erica looked confused, probably thinking he was about to say something romantic about her. The guests settled into expectant silence, ready for another wedding toast. I found myself holding my breath, not sure what was coming, but sensing that something significant was about to happen. Michael's eyes found mine across the room, and he smiled. Not the polite, social smile I'd been seeing all weekend, but something warmer, more genuine. Something that looked like respect. "To Major Scott," he said, raising his glass toward me. The words hit the room like a physical force. I heard gasps, murmurs of surprise, the sound of chairs scraping as people turned to look at me. Erica's face went completely blank, her champagne glass frozen halfway to her lips. Her friends stopped giggling. "Major Emma Scott," Michael continued, "who served 2 tours in Afghanistan, who earned the Bronze Star for Valor, who led a medical evacuation unit that saved over 300 lives. A woman whose courage and dedication exemplify the very best of military service." The room was standing now, raising their glasses toward me. I saw aunts and uncles looking stunned, saw cousins I barely knew nodding with newfound respect. Saw Erica's friends exchanging confused glances, finally understanding that they'd been laughing at someone whose accomplishments dwarfed anything they'd ever done. "To Major Scott," the room echoed, 200 voices speaking my name with reverence instead of pity. I stood slowly, accepting the toast with a nod. Erica was still frozen at her table, her perfect wedding moment hijacked by the revelation of who her sister actually was. The sister she'd been systematically diminishing for years. The sister whose worth she'd been denying in public for so long that she'd started believing her own performance. Michael walked over to me, extending his hand. "Thank you for your service," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made something tight in my chest finally loosen. As the applause died down and conversations resumed, I caught Erica's eye across the room. She was staring at me like she was seeing a stranger, like the sister she thought she knew had been replaced by someone else entirely. Someone worthy of respect. Someone whose life had meaning and purpose that existed completely independent of her approval. And for the first time in 28 years, Erica had nothing to say. Erica and I weren't always like this. There was a time when I was the big sister who meant safety, who could fix anything that went wrong in her small world. When we were kids, I was the one she ran to when nightmares woke her up, when bullies made her cry, when homework seemed too hard to manage alone. I was 7 when she was born, old enough to help with bottles and diaper changes, old enough to feel genuinely excited about having a little sister to look after. Mom worked long hours at the hospital, Dad was often traveling for business, and I naturally fell into the role of Erica's protector and guide. She was a beautiful baby, all dark curls and enormous blue eyes, the kind of child strangers would stop to admire in grocery stores. I took pride in that, in being the big sister of the prettiest little girl anyone had ever seen. When she started walking, I taught her to navigate stairs safely. When she began talking, I helped her practice difficult words. I braided her hair for school photos and bandaged her scraped knees when she fell off her bike. But somewhere along the way, the dynamic shifted. Erica learned that being helpless brought attention, that struggling meant someone would step in to make things easier. And I, without realizing what was happening, became her enabler. In middle school, when she forgot about a science project until the night before it was due, I stayed up until 3 in the morning helping her build a volcano that would earn her a B+. When she spent her lunch money on makeup instead of food, I shared my sandwich without question. When she got in trouble for talking back to teachers, I was the one who smoothed things over with our parents, explaining how Erica was just misunderstood, just expressing herself. High school brought new challenges and the same patterns. Erica struggled with math, so I did her homework. She had conflicts with friends, so I listened to hours of drama and offered solutions she rarely took. She wanted expensive clothes our parents couldn't afford, so I used my part-time job money to buy them for her, telling myself it was what big sisters were supposed to do. I thought I was being loving. I thought I was protecting her from the harsh realities of consequences and disappointment. Instead, I was teaching her that someone would always be there to clean up her messes, that her problems could become other people's responsibilities, that she didn't need to develop resilience because she had me. The pattern continued into college. When Erica struggled with coursework, I wrote papers for her during my winter breaks. When she overspent her allowance, I sent money from my ROTC stipend. When she got caught plagiarizing and faced academic probation, I drove 8 hours to meet with her dean and advocate on her behalf, crafting explanations about stress and family circumstances that painted her as a victim rather than someone who'd made poor choices. Each time I rescued her, I told myself it was temporary. This would be the last time she needed my help. This would be the incident that taught her to stand on her own feet. But there was always another crisis, always another situation that required my intervention. And Erica never seemed to learn from these experiences. If anything, she seemed to expect them. After college, when Erica moved back home and struggled to find direction, I helped her write resumes and practice for interviews. When she finally got a job at a local boutique but complained constantly about the work and the pay, I supplemented her income so she could afford her own apartment. When she wanted to take expensive vacation trips but couldn't save money, I covered her costs, reasoning that she deserved to enjoy life while she was young. I was so focused on being helpful that I missed what was really happening. Erica wasn't learning to be independent, she was learning to be dependent. She wasn't developing problem-solving skills, she was developing manipulation skills. And I wasn't being a supportive sister, I was being an enabler who allowed her to avoid growing up. The warning signs were there if I'd chosen to see them. The way she'd become irritated when I couldn't immediately solve her problems. How she'd grown impatient with my advice, wanting solutions without effort on her part. The casual way she'd dismiss my accomplishments while expecting me to celebrate hers. How she started taking my help for granted, treating my sacrifices like services she was entitled to receive. But I didn't see it, or I didn't want to see it. I was busy building my own life, advancing in my military career, earning recognition and respect in demanding environments. Erica's problems felt manageable by comparison, small inconveniences I could handle in my spare time. I told myself I was being generous, that family was about supporting each other through difficult times. Looking back, I realized I was afraid of what would happen if I stopped helping. Would she fail completely? Would she resent me? Would our relationship survive if I let her struggle instead of swooping in to save her? These fears kept me locked in a pattern that was ultimately destructive for both of us. Erica learned to see me as a resource rather than a person, someone whose value was measured by my usefulness to her. And I learned to see myself through her eyes, deriving worth from my ability to fix her problems, to be needed, to be indispensable. We weren't sisters so much as co-conspirators in a dysfunctional dance that kept her emotionally adolescent and me chronically overextended. The irony was perfect. While I was building a career that demanded leadership, responsibility, and accountability, I was enabling someone to avoid all three. While I was earning recognition for courage and competence, I was teaching my sister that she didn't need either quality because someone else would always bail her out. By the time Erica got engaged, our relationship had calcified into something that looked like closeness, but was actually codependency. She depended on me for emotional support, financial backup, and practical solutions. I depended on her needing me, on being the responsible one, the reliable one, the sister who had everything figured out. Neither of us was happy with this arrangement, but neither of us knew how to change it. Erica resented needing help but expected it anyway. I resented providing help but continued doing it. We were trapped in roles we'd created over decades, playing parts that no longer fit who we'd become. And underneath it all, a more troubling truth was emerging. Erica didn't just depend on me, she'd grown to resent me. My competence made her feel inadequate. My achievements highlighted her lack of direction. My stability emphasized her chaos. Instead of inspiring her to grow, my success became a mirror that showed her everything she wasn't. That resentment would eventually transform into something uglier, something that would poison our relationship in ways I couldn't have imagined when I was 7 years old and proud to be her big sister. The wedding toast changed everything, but the real reckoning came in the days that followed. I went home that night and sat in my quiet apartment, still in my bridesmaid dress, trying to process what had happened. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I'd been seen clearly by a room full of people. Not as Erica's unmarried sister, not as the family member who couldn't figure out relationships, but as someone who'd earned respect through my own actions. Michael's words kept echoing in my head. Major Emma Scott, who served 2 tours in Afghanistan, who earned the Bronze Star for valor. He'd known things about my military service that my own sister had never bothered to learn. While Erica was making jokes about my single status, she was completely ignorant of what I'd actually accomplished in my career. That realization hit me like cold water. Erica didn't know about the Bronze Star because I'd never told her. She didn't know about the medical evacuation unit because I'd never explained what my job actually entailed. She didn't know about the lives saved or the commendations earned because I'd assumed she wouldn't be interested, and her dismissive attitude had confirmed that assumption. But her ignorance went deeper than just military details. Erica didn't know me. She'd constructed a version of me in her head, the unmarried sister, the career woman who'd sacrificed personal happiness for professional success, the cautionary tale she could reference whenever she needed to feel better about her own choices. She'd been so invested in this narrative that she'd never bothered to discover who I actually was. The phone calls started 3 days after the wedding. Erica's voice was different, smaller somehow, lacking the confident edge I'd grown accustomed to over the years. "Hey," she said when I answered. "How are you doing?" It was such a simple question, but loaded with complexity. How was I doing? I was angry. I was hurt. I was tired of being the supportive sister to someone who'd spent years systematically undermining me in public. I was done pretending that her jokes were harmless, that her dismissive attitude didn't matter, that our relationship was healthy just because we were family. "I'm fine," I said, which was both true and completely inadequate. "Listen, about the other night." Erica's voice trailed off. She was waiting for me to fill the silence, to make this easier for her the way I always had. To smooth over the awkwardness and pretend nothing had happened. But I didn't. I waited. "I didn't know," she said finally. "About your military stuff. The Bronze Star and all that. You never mentioned it." "You never asked," I replied, and the truth of that statement hung between us like a challenge. "Well, I'm asking now," she said, but there was something defensive in her tone. "Why didn't you tell me about any of this?" I could have explained. Could have walked her through years of conversations where she'd changed the subject whenever I mentioned work, where she'd made it clear that my career was boring to her, where she'd rolled her eyes at military stories and made jokes about army stuff. Could have pointed out how she'd consistently shown more interest in celebrity gossip than in her sister's actual life. Instead, I said, "It didn't seem like you'd be interested." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. Finally, she spoke again. "That's not fair, Emma. I'm your sister. Of course I'd be interested." But we both knew that wasn't true. Erica had perfected the art of selective attention, caring about people's lives only when they directly impacted her own. She knew every detail about her friends' relationship dramas, but couldn't remember what rank I'd achieved or where I'd been stationed. She could recite the plot of every reality show she watched, but had no idea what my job actually involved. "Okay," I said, not because I agreed, but because I was too tired to argue. "Is there something specific you wanted to talk about?" She paused, and I could practically hear her struggling with unfamiliar territory. Erica wasn't used to being on the defensive, wasn't comfortable with conversations where she wasn't controlling the narrative. "I wanted to make sure we're okay. You know, after everything." "Everything." Such a small word to encompass years of casual cruelty disguised as sisterly teasing. All those family dinners where she'd made me the punchline. All those gatherings where she'd positioned herself as the successful sister and me as the cautionary tale. The wedding speech that had finally crossed a line I hadn't even realized existed until she stepped over it. "Are we okay?" I asked, turning the question back to her. "Do you think we're okay?" Another long pause. "I think you're being dramatic about this whole thing," she said, and there it was. The Erica I knew, the one who couldn't acknowledge fault without minimizing it first. "It was just a joke, Emma. I didn't mean anything by it. Just a joke." The standard defense for people who wanted to say cruel things without accepting responsibility for the damage they caused. But this wasn't about one joke, one moment of poor judgment at a wedding reception. This was about a pattern of behavior that had been building for years, a systematic campaign to diminish me that had become so habitual, she probably didn't even notice she was doing it anymore. "Which part was the joke?" I asked. "The part where you called me unworthy of a husband in front of 200 people? Or all the other times you've made comments about my personal life over the years?" "Oh, come on," she said, and I could hear the familiar irritation creeping into her voice. "You're being too sensitive. Everyone knows I don't mean anything by it. It's just how we talk to each other." But that wasn't how we talked to each other. That was how she talked to me. I'd never made public jokes about her relationships, never used family gatherings as opportunities to highlight her shortcomings, never treated her life as entertainment for other people. The dynamic was entirely one-sided, and she was trying to normalize it by pretending it was mutual. "No, Erica," I said quietly. "That's how you talk to me. I don't talk to you that way." The distinction seemed to catch her off guard. She was quiet for a moment, probably running through her memories, trying to find examples of times I'd publicly humiliated her the way she'd been doing to me. She wouldn't find any because they didn't exist. "Look," she said finally, "maybe I got a little carried away sometimes. But you have to admit, you don't exactly make it easy. You never bring anyone around, you never talk about dating, you're always so serious about everything. What am I supposed to think?" And there it was, the heart of the problem. Erica thought my life was incomplete because it didn't match her template for what a woman's life should look like. Because I'd chosen service over romance, achievement over traditional milestones, purpose over the kind of happiness she understood, she'd decided I was somehow broken. And she'd felt entitled to point that out, publicly and repeatedly, as if my life choices were a personal affront to her worldview. "You're supposed to think that your sister is a competent adult who doesn't need your commentary on her personal choices," I said. "You're supposed to respect the fact that different people want different things out of life." "I do respect you," she protested, but the words sounded hollow even as she said them. "No," I said. "You don't. And that's the problem." The shift in our relationship didn't happen overnight, but it was unmistakable. For the first time in our adult lives, I stopped automatically saying yes to Erica's requests. When she called asking for money to cover an unexpected expense, I suggested she speak with her new husband about budgeting. When she wanted help dealing with a workplace conflict, I told her I was confident she could handle it herself. When she complained about feeling overwhelmed with wedding thank you notes, I didn't volunteer to help her write them. At first, she seemed genuinely confused by these responses. Erica was accustomed to presenting problems and having me provide solutions, to expressing frustration and having me take action to fix whatever was bothering her. She'd grown so dependent on my interventions that she'd forgotten how to handle difficulties independently. "I don't understand why you're being like this," she said during one phone call, after I'd declined to help her research vacation destinations for her honeymoon. "It's like you don't care about me anymore." But that wasn't true. I did care about Erica. I was just beginning to understand the difference between caring and enabling. Caring meant wanting her to be happy and successful. Enabling meant removing obstacles from her path so she never learned to navigate challenges herself. I'd been enabling her for so long that I'd forgotten what healthy support actually looked like. The wedding had been a turning point, but the real work was happening in these smaller moments, these daily choices about how much responsibility I would take for Erica's problems. Every time I resisted the urge to rescue her, every time I let her struggle instead of stepping in with solutions, I was breaking patterns that had defined our relationship for decades. Erica didn't appreciate this new approach. She'd grown comfortable with our established dynamic, where her needs automatically became my priorities, where her problems could be solved through my effort. Having to handle her own difficulties felt like punishment to her, like I was withholding love rather than offering a different kind of support. "You've changed," she told me during one particularly tense conversation. "Ever since the wedding, you've been different." Cold. I wasn't cold, I was boundaried. But Erica had never encountered boundaries in our relationship before, so they felt like rejection to her. She couldn't distinguish between me caring about her and me taking responsibility for her, between love and codependency, between healthy support and unhealthy enabling. Meanwhile, something interesting was happening in my own life. Without Erica's constant need for rescue consuming my emotional energy, I had more bandwidth for other relationships, other pursuits, other forms of fulfillment. I started accepting social invitations I would have previously declined, saying yes to opportunities that didn't involve solving someone else's problems. I joined a hiking group and discovered I enjoyed the peaceful challenge of mountain trails. I started taking art classes, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. I began dating someone I'd met through work, a fellow veteran who understood the demands of military service and didn't see my career as an obstacle to overcome. These changes weren't motivated by spite or a desire to prove anything to Erica. They were simply the natural result of having more space in my life, more energy to invest in activities that brought me joy rather than activities that solved other people's problems. But Erica seemed to interpret my newfound social life as a personal attack on her, evidence that I was deliberately excluding her from my happiness. "I see you're finally dating someone," she said during one of our increasingly infrequent phone conversations. Her tone was careful, controlled, but I could hear the edge underneath. I guess all my advice about putting yourself out there finally paid off. The revisionist history was breathtaking. Erica had never given me advice about dating. She'd made jokes about my single status. She'd never encouraged me to put myself out there. She'd used my unmarried state as ammunition for public entertainment. But now that my life was changing in ways she couldn't take credit for, she was trying to claim some ownership of my success. "I don't think your advice had anything to do with it," I said mildly. "But I appreciate the sentiment." The comment clearly stung, and Erica's response revealed more than she probably intended. "You know, Emma, you don't have to be so defensive all the time. I was always on your side, even when you couldn't see it. Maybe if you'd listened to me more, you wouldn't have spent so many years alone." There it was, the core belief that had driven years of harmful behavior. Erica genuinely believed she'd been helping me, that her public commentary on my personal life had been a form of tough love designed to motivate positive change. She couldn't see how her help had actually been humiliation, how her concern had been condescension, how her jokes had been cruelty disguised as caring. "I wasn't alone," I said. "I was building a life that had meaning and purpose. Just because it didn't look like the life you wanted doesn't mean it was wrong." "I never said it was wrong," she protested, but we both knew that wasn't true. Every joke, every comment, every public observation about my single status had carried the implicit message that my life was incomplete, that I was somehow failing at being a woman because I hadn't prioritized romantic relationships the way she had. The conversation ended awkwardly, as most of our conversations did these days. Erica seemed frustrated by my unwillingness to return to our old dynamic, while I was frustrated by her inability to understand why that dynamic had been problematic. We were stuck in a standoff, neither willing to give ground, both convinced the other was being unreasonable. But I wasn't going back. For the first time in my adult life, I was experiencing what it felt like to have relationships based on mutual respect rather than rescue missions. I was learning that healthy people didn't require constant intervention, that functional adults could handle their own problems without expecting others to solve them. Erica would have to learn these lessons too, but she would have to learn them without using me as her safety net. It was long overdue, and while the process was uncomfortable for both of us, I knew it was necessary. Some changes hurt before they heal, and our relationship was finally experiencing the kind of pain that leads to growth. 6 months after the wedding, Erica's attempts at reconciliation had taken on a different quality. Where her initial phone calls had been defensive and somewhat accusatory, her more recent communications carried an undertone of desperation I'd never heard before. She was struggling without my constant support, and the reality of managing her own problems was proving more challenging than she'd anticipated. The first sign came when she called about her job. Erica had been working at the boutique for 2 years, and while she'd frequently complained about the work and the pay, she'd never shown any initiative to find something better. With me no longer supplementing her income or helping her navigate workplace conflicts, she was beginning to understand that complaining wasn't the same as problem-solving. "I think my manager hates me," she said during one conversation. "She's always criticizing everything I do, and she gave the promotion I wanted to someone who's only been there 6 months. It's so unfair." In the past, I would have spent an hour listening to her vent, then helped her craft strategies for improving her relationship with her manager or finding a new position altogether. I would have reviewed her performance, identified areas for improvement, maybe even helped her update her resume and practice interview skills. Instead, I said, "That sounds frustrating. What do you think you're going to do about it?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "What do you mean, what am I going to do?" "I was hoping you'd have some ideas." "I'm sure you'll figure something out," I replied. "You're smart and capable. You don't need me to solve workplace problems for you." But the truth was, Erica had never learned to solve workplace problems because I'd always been there to do it for her. She'd never developed the skills necessary to navigate professional relationships, handle criticism constructively, or take initiative for her own career advancement. These were lessons most people learned through trial and error in their 20s, but Erica was approaching 30 and still expected someone else to manage these challenges for her. The pattern repeated itself across multiple areas of her life. When she had a conflict with Michael about finances, she called asking me to mediate instead of working through the disagreement directly with her husband. When she was struggling to maintain friendships that had become strained during the wedding planning process, she wanted me to help her understand what had gone wrong and how to fix it. Each time, I offered the same response: encouragement paired with confidence in her ability to handle the situation independently. It wasn't cruel or dismissive, it was simply a refusal to do emotional labor that rightfully belonged to her. But Erica experienced it as abandonment, as evidence that I no longer cared about her problems. "You used to help me with things," she said during one particularly tense conversation. "Now it's like you don't want to be bothered with me at all." "I want you to be able to help yourself," I replied. "That's different from not caring." But Erica couldn't see the distinction. In her mind, love was measured by availability, by willingness to drop everything and focus on her needs, by readiness to provide solutions for problems she didn't want to solve herself. My new approach felt like withdrawal of affection rather than an invitation to grow. Meanwhile, the changes in my own life were becoming more pronounced. Without the constant drain of managing Erica's crises, I had energy for pursuits that actually brought me fulfillment. My relationship with David, the veteran I'd been dating, was developing into something serious and stable. We shared common values, mutual respect, and a deep understanding of each other's professional commitments. When I mentioned David casually during a family dinner, the response was telling. Our parents were delighted, asking thoughtful questions about how we'd met and what he did for work. But Erica's reaction was complex, a mixture of surprise and something that looked almost like resentment. "So you're actually dating someone now," she said, as if my previous single status had been a character defect that was finally being corrected. "How long has this been going on?" "A few months," I said simply. "And you didn't think to mention it before?" There was an edge to her voice that our parents didn't seem to notice, but I heard it clearly. Erica was upset that I developed a significant relationship without consulting her, without seeking her approval or input. "It didn't seem necessary to provide regular updates," I replied, which was both true and deliberately understated. The reality was that I'd learned to be selective about what I shared with Erica, protective of the good things in my life that she might find ways to diminish or critique. After dinner, Erica cornered me in the kitchen while I was helping with dishes. "I can't believe you didn't tell me you were seeing someone," she said, her voice low enough that our parents couldn't hear. We used to tell each other everything. But we never told each other everything. Erica had told me her problems and expected solutions. I'd listened and provided support. She'd shared her dramas and demanded attention. I'd been her audience and her resource, but never her equal partner in genuine communication. Things change, I said, focusing on the plate I was drying. They don't have to, Erica replied, and there was something almost pleading in her tone. We could go back to how we used to be. I miss having you to talk to. She missed having me available to manage her problems, but she'd never missed me as a person. The distinction was important, and I was finally beginning to understand it clearly. I don't think that would be good for either of us, I said gently. We both need to learn how to handle our own lives. Erica's face tightened with frustration. You're being ridiculous, Emma. This whole thing is ridiculous. So I made a joke at my wedding that you didn't like. So what? Are you going to punish me forever? That was how she saw it, punishment for one mistake rather than a necessary boundary after years of problematic behavior. Erica couldn't acknowledge the pattern because admitting the pattern would mean accepting responsibility for damage that extended far beyond one wedding toast. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm just not enabling you anymore. The word hung between us like an accusation. Erica's eyes flashed with anger, and I could see her struggling with the implication that she'd been enabled, that she'd become dependent on someone else's intervention to manage her own life. Enabling, she repeated. Is that what you think I've been doing? Using you. Haven't you been? I asked quietly. The question forced a moment of uncomfortable self-reflection that Erica clearly didn't want to engage with. She'd grown so accustomed to having problems solved for her that she'd never stopped to consider what that pattern cost the person doing the solving, or what it prevented her from developing in herself. I thought you wanted to help, she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. I did want to help, I replied. But there's a difference between helping someone and doing everything for them. I was doing everything for you, and it wasn't good for either of us. Erica left that conversation angry and confused, unable to process the idea that my assistance might have been harmful rather than helpful. She'd built her identity around being the sister who needed support, who required intervention, who couldn't quite manage on her own. Asking her to abandon that identity felt like asking her to become someone entirely different. But that was exactly what needed to happen. Erica would have to learn who she was when she couldn't rely on someone else to solve her problems, to manage her emotions, to provide the stability she'd never developed independently. It would be uncomfortable and probably frightening, but it was necessary growth that was long overdue. The process was difficult for me too. Breaking patterns that had defined our relationship for decades meant accepting that I'd played a role in creating Erica's dependency, that my desire to be helpful had sometimes crossed the line into control. I'd enjoyed being needed, being seen as competent and reliable, being the sister who had everything figured out. Learning to step back, to offer support without taking ownership, to care without rescuing, these were skills I was still developing. But for the first time in our relationship, both Erica and I were being challenged to grow, to become more complete versions of ourselves rather than playing complementary roles that kept us both limited. The transformation wasn't pretty or comfortable, but it was real. And slowly, gradually, I was beginning to see glimpses of who Erica might become when she stopped expecting someone else to manage her life for her. The real test came 8 months after the wedding when Erica called me crying. Her voice was shaky and desperate in a way I'd rarely heard, and my first instinct was to drop everything and fix whatever had gone wrong. The old patterns were still there, still powerful, still pulling me toward familiar territory. Emma, I need you, she said through tears. Everything is falling apart, and I don't know what to do. The crisis was multifaceted. Erica had been let go from the boutique after a series of conflicts with management and customers. Her relationship with Michael was strained due to financial stress and her inability to contribute equally to household expenses. Several of her friendships had deteriorated after she'd repeatedly borrowed money she couldn't repay. She was facing the consequences of years of avoiding responsibility, and the weight of it was overwhelming her. In the past, I would have immediately driven over to her apartment with a plan and a checkbook. I would have helped her craft a strategy for finding new employment, mediated her conflicts with Michael, maybe even paid some bills to reduce the immediate pressure. I would have spent days or weeks managing her crisis, treating her problems as emergencies that required my immediate intervention. Instead, I listened. I acknowledged how difficult the situation must be for her. And then I said, "This sounds really challenging, Erica. What are you thinking of doing?" "What am I thinking of doing?" she repeated, and I could hear the disbelief in her voice. "Emma, I just told you everything is falling apart. I need you to help me figure this out." "I believe you can figure it out yourself," I said gently. "You're capable of more than you think you are." The silence that followed was long and loaded. Erica was processing the reality that her usual safety net wasn't going to appear, that for perhaps the first time in her adult life, she would have to navigate a serious crisis without someone else taking primary responsibility for the solutions. "I can't do this alone," she said finally, and there was genuine fear in her voice. "You're not alone," I replied. "You have Michael. You have friends. You have resources and options that you haven't explored yet. But you do have to do the work yourself." Erica hung up angry and desperate, but something important had happened in that conversation. For the first time, she'd been forced to confront the reality that her problems were hers to solve, that other people's lives couldn't be indefinitely disrupted by her inability to manage her own. Over the following weeks, I watched from a distance as Erica struggled with challenges she'd never faced independently. She filed for unemployment benefits, something she'd never had to do because I'd always provided financial backup during job transitions. She had difficult conversations with Michael about their future, discussions she'd previously avoided by expecting me to mediate their conflicts. She reached out to friends she'd been taking advantage of and attempted to make amends. She applied for jobs that were beneath her previous standards, but within her actual qualifications. She began attending therapy, initially to complain about how unfairly she was being treated by everyone in her life, but gradually to examine patterns of behavior that had led to her current situation. The process was messy and painful and imperfect. Erica made mistakes, experienced setbacks, sometimes fell back into old patterns of expecting others to solve her problems. But slowly, incrementally, she began developing skills she'd never needed to cultivate: resilience, self-reliance, genuine problem-solving abilities. 3 months after her crisis call, Erica found a new job. It wasn't glamorous work, administrative support at a medical office, but it was steady employment with benefits and opportunities for advancement. She negotiated a payment plan with creditors she'd been avoiding. She worked out a budget with Michael that didn't require external financial support. Most importantly, she did all of this without my direct intervention. I provided emotional support when she asked for it, celebrated her successes when she shared them, but I didn't take ownership of her problems or responsibility for her solutions. The change in Erica was subtle but unmistakable. She carried herself differently, with less of the helpless energy that had characterized her for years. When she talked about work challenges, she discussed strategies she was considering rather than hoping I would provide answers. When conflicts arose in her marriage, she worked through them with Michael instead of expecting me to mediate. "I got a promotion," she told me during one of our monthly phone calls, and there was pride in her voice that I hadn't heard before. "It's not huge, but it comes with a raise and more responsibility." "That's wonderful," I said, and meant it. "How do you feel about the additional responsibility?" "Nervous but excited," she admitted. "A year ago, I would have been terrified of doing anything wrong. Now I figure I'll make mistakes and learn from them." It was a small statement, but it represented a fundamental shift in how Erica approached challenges. Instead of seeking to avoid mistakes through external management, she was accepting that mistakes were part of learning, that growth required some discomfort and failure. Our relationship was changing too, slowly evolving from codependency towards something healthier. We talked less frequently but more authentically. Erica no longer treated me as a resource for problem solving, and I no longer felt responsible for managing her emotional state. We were beginning to relate as adults who cared about each other, but maintained separate lives and separate responsibilities. The transformation wasn't complete, and probably never would be. Decades of established patterns don't disappear overnight. But both Erica and I were becoming more complete versions of ourselves, learning skills and developing qualities that had been stunted by our previous dynamic. For the first time in our adult lives, We were both growing. And while the process was difficult and sometimes painful, it was creating the foundation for a relationship based on mutual respect rather than mutual dependency. 2 years after the wedding, Erica called to tell me she was pregnant. Her voice carried excitement mixed with nervousness, the natural apprehension of someone facing a major life change. But there was something else there too, something I wouldn't have heard in her voice before our relationship shifted: confidence. We weren't exactly trying, but we weren't preventing it either, she said. Michael is over the moon. I'm terrified and thrilled at the same time. I congratulated her genuinely, noting how different this conversation felt from the crisis calls that had characterized our communication pattern for so many years. Erica was sharing good news rather than seeking rescue, expressing natural concerns about a major transition rather than expecting me to manage her anxiety for her. Are you scared about the responsibility? I asked, curious how she was processing the impending reality of being entirely responsible for another human being. Of course, she said with a laugh. But also excited about it? I keep thinking about all the things I want to teach this kid, all the experiences I want to share. It feels like a chance to do something really important, you know. The Erica I'd known before would have focused primarily on how others could help her manage the challenges of parenthood. She would have been already planning how family members could provide support, childcare, financial assistance, emotional management. Instead, she was thinking about what she could give to her child, what she had to offer as a mother. I think you're going to be great at this, I said, and meant it completely. Really? She asked, and I could hear the vulnerability underneath the question. Sometimes I worry that I'm not responsible enough, I guess. That I don't know how to take care of someone else when I've spent so much of my life having other people take care of me. It was a moment of remarkable self-awareness, an acknowledgement of patterns that the old Erica would never have been able to recognize, much less articulate. She was seeing herself clearly, understanding both her limitations and her capacity for growth. The fact that you're thinking about that tells me you're already more prepared than you realize, I said. Parenthood changes people. It calls up qualities you didn't know you had. Over the following months, I watched Erica navigate pregnancy with increasing competence and maturity. She researched childcare options and interviewed pediatricians. She and Michael attended parenting classes and prepared their apartment for a baby. She managed morning sickness and work demands without expecting others to accommodate her discomfort. Most significantly, she didn't ask me to take on any of the emotional or logistical labor associated with preparing for parenthood. She shared updates and asked for advice occasionally, but she clearly understood that this was her responsibility, her journey to manage. The baby shower revealed how much our family dynamics had shifted. Erica organized the event herself, working with Michael's sister and a few friends to plan something simple but meaningful. In the past, I would have been expected to handle most of the arrangements while Erica focused on being celebrated. Instead, I was simply a guest, bringing a gift and enjoying the celebration without feeling responsible for its success. During the shower, I overheard Erica talking with some of her friends about the changes in her life over the past few years. She spoke about learning to handle challenges independently, about developing confidence in her ability to solve problems, about the satisfaction that came from taking ownership of her own life. I used to rely on my sister for everything, she said to someone who didn't know our history. It wasn't fair to either of us. Learning to stand on my own feet has been hard, but it's also been really empowering. The conversation was a revelation. Erica wasn't just acknowledging what had changed, she was recognizing why the change had been necessary. She understood that our previous dynamic had been unhealthy, that her dependence had been limiting her growth as much as it had been exhausting for me. When her daughter was born, Erica handled the challenges of new motherhood with grace and determination I wouldn't have expected from the sister I'd known before. She struggled with sleep deprivation and breastfeeding difficulties and the overwhelming responsibility of caring for an infant, but she didn't expect others to solve these problems for her. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, she told me during one of my visits to meet the baby. But also the most rewarding. Every day I figure out something new about how to be her mother. Watching Erica with her daughter was like seeing a completely different person. She was attentive and nurturing, confident in her instincts. willing to make mistakes and learn from them. The anxious, dependent woman who had characterized so much of our adult relationship had been replaced by someone capable and self-possessed. "You've really found your footing," I told her during that visit, and she smiled with satisfaction. "I had to," she said simply. "She needs me to be strong and reliable. I can't be that for her if I'm always falling apart and expecting someone else to put me back together." It was a perfect articulation of what parenthood had awakened in her, the understanding that being needed by someone vulnerable requires developing genuine strength, not just the performance of helplessness that attracts rescuers. Our relationship had settled into something that felt both familiar and entirely new. We were sisters again, but sisters who respected each other's autonomy, who offered support without taking ownership, who celebrated each other's successes without competition or resentment. The journey from codependency to healthy relationship had been difficult and sometimes painful, but it had ultimately given both of us something we'd never had before: the ability to love each other without losing ourselves in the process. Erica had learned she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. And I had learned that the greatest gift I could give someone wasn't solving their problems, but believing in their ability to solve those problems themselves. 5 years after the wedding, I received an invitation that felt like a full-circle moment. Michael was being promoted to lieutenant colonel, and Erica was organizing a celebration dinner at their home. The invitation was handwritten, personal, and completely free of the undertones of obligation or expectation that had characterized so many of Erica's previous requests for my time and attention. I arrived at their house to find a warm, welcoming space that reflected the stability Erica had built in her life. Their daughter, now 3 years old, was playing quietly in the living room while Erica finished preparations in the kitchen. Michael greeted me at the door with genuine warmth, the kind of respect that had been evident since that wedding toast years ago. "Emma, so glad you could make it," he said, taking my coat. "Erica's been looking forward to this all week." The evening was relaxed and celebratory, a gathering of friends and family who came together simply to acknowledge Michael's achievement and enjoy each other's company. I noticed how naturally Erica moved through the role of hostess, managing logistics and conversations with confidence and grace. There was no drama, no crisis requiring management, no sense that I needed to step in and help with anything. During dinner, Michael stood to make a brief speech about the significance of his promotion and his gratitude for the support of family and friends. When he finished, Erica rose as well, glass in hand, and I felt a moment of reflexive tension. The last time I'd been at a formal gathering where Erica had made public remarks, the results had been devastating. "I wanted to say something too," Erica began, looking around the table at the assembled guests, "about how much this promotion means to our family and how proud I am of Michael's dedication and service." She spoke eloquently about military life, about the sacrifices and rewards of serving something larger than oneself, about the honor of being part of a community committed to protecting others. Her words revealed a depth of understanding about military service that she'd never demonstrated before, knowledge she'd clearly gained through her marriage to Michael and her growing maturity. But then her gaze found mine across the table, and I saw something in her expression that made my breath catch. It was respect, genuine and unguarded, the kind of recognition I'd always hoped for but never expected to receive from her. "I also want to acknowledge someone else whose service has meant a great deal to our family," she continued. "My sister Emma served 2 tours in Afghanistan, earned the Bronze Star for Valor, and led a medical evacuation unit that saved hundreds of lives. She's taught me what real strength looks like, what it means to serve something bigger than yourself, and how to stand on your own feet even when it's difficult." The table turned to look at me, faces reflecting the same respect I'd seen that night at the wedding reception. But this time was different. This wasn't Michael advocating for recognition I deserved. This was Erica herself, choosing to honor accomplishments she'd spent years ignoring or minimizing. "Emma," she said, raising her glass toward me, "thank you for your service. And thank you for being the kind of sister who loved me enough to let me learn how to be strong." The toast was met with genuine applause, warm acknowledgement from people who understood the significance of what Erica was saying. But more important than their recognition was Erica herself, the sister who had finally learned to see me clearly and wasn't afraid to admit what she'd been missing for so many years. After dinner, while other guests were enjoying coffee and conversation in the living room, Erica and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen, cleaning up the dinner dishes together. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who understand each other and don't need to fill every moment with words. "That was a lovely dinner," I said, handing her a plate to dry. "You've become quite the hostess." "Thanks," she said, smiling. "I actually enjoy entertaining now. It used to stress me out so much because I was always worried something would go wrong. Now I figure if something goes wrong, we'll handle it." The simple statement encapsulated everything that had changed about Erica over the past 5 years. She'd learned that problems were manageable rather than catastrophic, that mistakes were learning opportunities rather than evidence of fundamental inadequacy, that she possessed resources and capabilities she'd never been forced to develop. "I owe you an apology," she said suddenly, setting down the dish towel and turning to face me directly. "Not just for the wedding, though that was awful and I'm sorry about that. But for all of it. All the years of treating you like you existed to solve my problems, of making jokes about your life instead of trying to understand it, of taking and taking without ever really giving anything back." The apology was more comprehensive and thoughtful than anything I'd expected to hear from Erica. She wasn't just acknowledging specific incidents. She was taking responsibility for patterns of behavior, for choices that had shaped our relationship for decades. "I used to think you were the lucky one," she continued. "The one who had everything figured out, who never struggled with anything. I didn't understand that you'd worked for everything you had, that your strength came from facing challenges instead of avoiding them. I was jealous of your competence, but I didn't want to do the work to develop my own. You've done that work now," I said gently. "Look at everything you've built. Your marriage, your home, your daughter, your career. You should be proud of what you've accomplished." "I am proud," she said, and there was wonder in her voice, as if she was still surprised by her own capabilities. "But I also understand now what it cost you to enable me for so long. How much energy you spent managing my problems instead of focusing on your own life. That wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't helping me become the person I needed to be." The conversation represented a level of emotional maturity and self-awareness that the old Erica had never possessed. She was taking responsibility not just for individual actions, but for their impact on both of us, acknowledging how her dependence had limited her growth while exhausting my resources. "We both learned from it," I said. "I had to learn that helping and enabling aren't the same thing, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone struggle instead of rescuing them." "Are you happy?" Erica asked suddenly. "With your life, I mean. With how things worked out." It was such a simple question, but loaded with complexity. Was I happy? I thought about my life as it existed now, my relationship with David, which had grown into something stable and fulfilling, my career, which continued to provide purpose and challenge, my friendships, which were based on mutual respect rather than crisis management, my relationship with Erica, which had evolved into something healthy and sustainable. "Yes," I said, and realized it was completely true. "I'm very happy." "Good," Erica said, and her smile was warm and genuine. "You deserve to be happy. You always did, even when I was too self-absorbed to see it." As we finished cleaning up and rejoined the other guests, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The sister who had once called me unworthy of a husband now understood and appreciated the worth I'd always possessed. The relationship that had once been defined by crisis and rescue had become something based on mutual respect and genuine affection. It hadn't been an easy transformation, and it hadn't happened quickly. But it had been worth every difficult conversation, every boundary maintained, every moment of choosing health over habit. Erica and I had both become more complete versions of ourselves, and our relationship was stronger for having survived the challenge of change. Standing in her living room, watching her interact with guests as a confident hostess and devoted mother, I felt something I'd never experienced before in relation to my sister: uncomplicated pride. Not the pride of someone who had fixed her problems or managed her success, but the pride of someone who had watched another person grow into their full potential. Erica had learned to stand on her own feet. And in doing so, She had finally become worthy of the kind of sister I'd always wanted to be. So that was the night my sister's words backfired, and the truth about my worth could no longer be denied. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had someone close try to define your value, only for reality to prove them wrong? How did you handle it? Did you set boundaries, or let their words slide? Share your story in the comments. I read every one. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more true stories about standing tall when others try to cut you down.